Hi everyone. I wanted to touch base real quick and do respond to the 5 quotes tag. I was tagged by the ever eloquent Bree Hill, whose channel I can highly recommend. She's one of these booktubers that when she's talking about books, I'm interested in what she has to say about the books, even if it's not a book that I'm ultimately probably going to read. I like hearing what she has to say about the books that she reads. So I can highly recommend her channel, and I did enjoy her quotes, her 5 quotes that she mentioned in her video. So I thought I would throw mine out there as well. The first 2 were very easy for me to come up with, because one of them is my screensaver on my computer, and the other one I have a T-shirt with it on it. So those 2 I knew right away were going to be in my 5 quotes. And then the last 3, though, I put a little thought into, and I looked through some of my books that I've read, and these all are excerpts from books, so they are quotes taken directly from works of fiction, which I found relevant or interesting or beautiful. So let's get to it. The very first one is my screensaver on my laptop says, "The mind unlearns with difficulty what it has long learned." That is by the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca, from about a couple thousand years ago in Rome. And this has been a very important thing, and this is why I love this quote, is that, when I first heard it a few years ago, this quote, I really, put it together that unlearning is as important as learning. And Seneca's saying here in this quote that unlearning is actually, more difficult in some cases than learning. And so, as my life goes on and I'm learning things, I also need to be constantly unlearning and relearning. So, that has been an important sort of guidepost for me. The second one, the second quote I actually have on a T-shirt, and I think it's just really pretty and cool. It is, "As long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields." So maybe that's not a pretty quote, but it's actually, to me, it's a very profound quote. That is by Leo Tolstoy, the Russian author, and he actually had this philosophy of nonviolence, and which is unusual since he wrote the book War and Peace, maybe, which is about the Napoleonic Wars. But he had a philosophy of nonviolence, and actually established these communities of nonviolence in Russia that existed well into the 20th century and were ultimately all eliminated by Stalin. But Tolstoy's nonviolent writings and nonviolent philosophy heavily influenced Gandhi, is my understanding, and then, of course, later, I guess, also Martin Luther King here in the U.S. So I just think that quote is so cool, and so that's number 2. Number 3 comes from the 19th century novel Middlemarch by George Eliot, who was Mary Ann Evans. She wrote under the pen name George Eliot in the 19th century, and this is actually the last paragraph from the book, the last sentence from the book. "For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been, is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." So this is actually pertaining to one of the main characters in Middlemarch, and I think it's so beautiful. That quote has always stuck with me. That last sort of sentence, I think, is so powerful, because it's the power of an individual life, a person who is not famous, who is not some great influencer of society, but yet, ultimately does impact those around them, and therefore does impact society. But then they're largely forgotten, by time. And so I thought that was kind of cool. And then the next quote comes from Fernando Pessoa from the Book of Disquiet. Fernando Pessoa, I did a chat on this book earlier this year. Fernando Pessoa was a Portuguese poet, and I loved the Book of Disquiet, so check that video out if you're interested. But the quote is, "Anything and everything, depending on how one sees it, is a marvel or a hindrance, an all or a nothing, a path or a problem. To see something in constantly new ways is to renew and multiply it. That is why the contemplative person, without ever leaving his village, will nevertheless have the whole universe at his disposal. And this I think is really encapsulates sort of my life philosophy about reading. How reading, I might live in a small apartment and whatnot, and not see the whole world and not experience all that there is. But I do have ultimately the whole universe at my disposal through thinking and through reading. So love that quote. Love everything about Fernando Pessoa. I have a book of his poetry on my 2017 TBR, so stay tuned for that. Finally, the last quote comes from a book called The Wandering Earth by Liu Cixin. Liu Cixin is a Chinese science fiction writer, and I did a chat about this book as well. So it was this year. I read it this year, and I just think this is so beautiful, a beautiful statement on the short transience of life. So what the context of this quote is the character in the book is watching someone blow bubbles, like soap bubbles. And the quote is, "I stared at the bubbles, watching the raging waves of color and light play over their surfaces, their twisting turbulences far too complex and intricate for the human mind to take in. I could not shake the thought that the bubbles knew how short their lives would be, and were frenziedly revealing their countless dreams and legends of their vast memories to the world. Seconds later, the raging waves of color and light disappeared in a nearly soundless explosion, leaving behind only the tiniest wisp." I think that's so beautiful. It reminds me of my dad. My dad passed away in early 2015, and I felt like when he passed away, it was like a library burning down because all of his experiences and stories. He recorded a lot of his stories, but just a lot of all of that that unique experience that was his, was lost after that. So I love that quote. I think it's absolutely beautiful. So those are my five quotes for the 5 quotes tag. Thanks to Bree Hill for tagging me. I love getting the idea to do this because it gave me a lot to think about over the last couple of days as I was traveling for work. So I'm glad to finally get this video out. I will have another chat coming up soon, so stay tuned. Take care. Bye.